From the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Victoria. Victoria, thank you very much for being on the show today. The way I love to do it, I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. So the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me here, Mehmet. I'm pleased to be here. So Victoria Pelletier, I'm a 20 plus year corporate executive in the B2B professional services space. And by that, I like to describe it as consult to operate technology as the enabler. Besides that, wife, mother, fitness fanatic, foodie, wine lover.
Great. Thank you again for being on the show today. So, maybe it's a little bit traditional question, but, when I was preparing and I checked your bio and your experience, like you've got like a great story to tell, at least if you can, tell us about the journey, how did you started and, how things turned to you become in a leadership and executive position as you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, the interesting thing is, where I landed wasn't what I thought I would be doing. In that from childhood, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I think my mother probably had me watching too much LA Law, which will date me a little bit. More yet 50, but I was watching LA Law in the 80s with her. And actually, I should also say I come from like extremely humble beginnings. And I'm adopted. My parents were lower socioeconomic status, no vacations. So I started working at a very, very young age at 11. And when I graduated high school, I skipped a couple of grades. So I was young and went off to university and I worked in a bank. In their contact center, it was incredibly flexible for my school schedule. And it turns out I loved the corporate world and I got promoted into leadership quite early. And so I kept putting off law school. I thought, oh, next year. And I never went, although I can't tell you how many contracts I've, read now over my career. But after 6 years in financial services, I got recruited as a chief operating officer for a BPO, business process outsourcing company. And it was a pretty big stretch role for me at just age 24. I was also a new mother at that point, but I'd been running large scale to contact center operations in financial services, which was their client base. And then added dynamic of like B2B, where you've got an additional sort of stakeholder you're serving. You've got your clients, but then you're also serving either their customers or their employees. And ever since then, I've stayed in that realm. And that was, the early days of labor arbitrage for contact center, technical help desk, service, sales kind of activities. And then I've stayed in it through a variety of variations on that theme since, including more recently IBM and Accenture.
So, is there anything special that you felt because you were in financial services, then you shifted to BPL, and then tech? So, anything that attracted you to tech, or it was like just the destiny?
Well, so I'm a very early adopter of tech, for sure. Sort of at the first. I mean, I recall like dial up and hearing the sound of that and being on it. And I think that's because my first serious boyfriend was in tech as well, and so that was probably what encouraged me and went me down that path. But the reality is, tech is the enabler to do more, different, better. And so whether that was in the contact center days, and I had large tech clients doing, their technical help desk. So Microsoft was one of my largest clients early on, doing all their kind of tier 1, tier 2 tech support. But just even seeing, I spent a decade running corporate travel businesses, the use of technology, whether that was the booking engine, but also how to get more efficient and effective in delivering operationally. So for me, it was how do we leverage technology to streamline the very, in many cases, routine activities that we were doing and allowing, the employees to focus on more human centered type of activities, engaging with customers. How do we allow them to just focus on kind of the exception base? So that's actually where it came from. And then I started working for technology first companies, like the likes of IBM, where although yes, we're talking about consulting around processes and implementation and development of technology, and then running it for them as well. I've always kind of come at it with the approach that we're not walking around with a toolkit of things we're selling. We're solving problems for our clients, and technology, processes, people, all of that need to work together to solve for those challenges.
Great. Yeah, no, it's a great transition and experience. There is one thing that stopped me also as well, Victoria. So when I was reading the bio and preparing, I've seen something is like you don't like to subscribe to status quo, but at the same time, you are in the corporate. And the reason I'm asking you this, because usually uh, when corporate becomes big, it becomes kind of the status quo itself, right? So how did you manage to have this? Because challenging status quo is the, I would say it should be the mantra, it should be the north star of everyone who likes to be in entrepreneurship and change things. So how did you manage this equilibrium? And as someone who worked also in corporate, I know like it's not easy. So would love to hear your thoughts and your experience with that.
Yeah, I've been a part of 18 mergers and acquisitions for the companies I've worked for. I've also supported many clients as well with their own M&A journeys. It's given me this lens on constant transformation and trying to see what's worked best in one environment versus the others. How do we bring them together? I'm usually accountable for turning around businesses or often distressed businesses, and that means you need to do things differently.
Hmm.
Those things coupled also with the fact that I've moved around every 2 or 3 years, in some part because of M&A and other part by choice. I'm not married to what was this it has been the status quo. In many cases, I didn't hire those teams. I didn't build the processes. I didn't choose that technology. So instead, my frame of reference is here's the goal or objective or where we're getting to. Here's what our strategy is. And let's figure out what the best path is. And I'm not looking to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, but challenging the thinking and this notion of this is the way we've always done it to move forward. And uh, I operate with radical candor, to be incredibly direct and be really transparent, uh, but doing it from a place of care and compassion to move us forward. I don't like, the passive aggressive ways of like the meetings after the meetings. And so that's become a big part of the brand that is Victoria and that people know me for. And
Hmm.
challenging the thinking and challenging hierarchy is what's necessary, quite frankly, in business.
That's another perspective I never thought about, but it's nice to learn from your experience, Victoria. Now another thing, and I'm focusing a lot on this part because I want to relate to some other topic I will ask you later. Now people thinks usually that corporate, especially the ones that, without mentioning any names here so no one gets offended, but they tend to become, we call them the slow dinosaurs. They things move very slow, bureaucracy. You start to need a lot of approvals to do even a very small change. So how did you manage, because when you also challenge the status quo, back to that, we need to be agile. So what is the success formula that you used to get this?
Um, so that does continue to be a challenge for me and frustrate me, to be super like frank about it with some of these really large corporates. Now, I should also say I've built and bought businesses and have been heavily involved in the startup and founder world, and so I try and bring that into these large corporates. And in many cases, for me, it's meant breaking the rules, and doing things differently. And so I I won't name names either, but there was one of these companies that I worked at where I was leading a large like client portfolio, and there had been a challenge with um, a really large like project that had gone wrong. There was some reputational damage for our organization, and we would need to build trust and hopefully get back to growth with this particular client. And the way that this big giant was operating was, they, had all of these different offerings, everything, let's say, we've got data and analytics, we've got our software group, we've got hardware, we've got all these different things. And we were trying to pair people from each of those practices up with the client. Well, that's not the way the client's organized, and nor is that the way we would build relationships. So I broke the structure, for example, and said, I own this business, so I'll make sure that I align the team accordingly. And I aligned them to, it would happen to be a financial services client. It said, like, you've got retail bank, you've got insurance, you've got wealth management. Like, that's the way they're structured. So what I did is align the team, and I put happened to be my data and analytics person was aligned to one part of it. My like digital and UX guy, with the retail bank, like all of this. And that is what built relationships. But it required for me, I got challenged internally at that organization because these people were asked to sell specifically for their product offering. And I said, that's not the way the client buys. So we're going to build relationships with the clients. They're going to own it. And then if it's their subject matter expertise, they have the opportunity to deliver it. Otherwise, they'll leverage other members of the team. And this, as I said, it was a distressed kind of portfolio given this challenged initial large project. And I said it was going to take 18 to 24 months to rebuild confidence, trust, and growth again with that client. We did it in 15 months, but I had to
Mhm.
consistently battle internally around that to break it. And so that's one example. And then there are just others where, I'm a little bit of the um, beg for forgiveness versus asking for permission type of individual. And my, mantra is about we're going to do the right thing, and right thing for our clients and our employees should mean for our shareholders as well. But to your point, we don't need 7 layers of approval to get that done.
Mhm.
Sounds, don't get me wrong. Like, if we're spending large dollars, I'm going to, seek some permission. I don't want to get fired for those kinds of things.
Yeah. What other challenges you face, like other than this, like what kind of obstacles you face down the road, Victoria?
The some of the biggest ones for me, and have been around, although I've worked for private companies earlier in my career, the last long time, well, probably 10 or 15 have been for Fortune 500 companies or even 100 companies, public companies that are focused on the quarter to quarter results. And for me, I'm much more around the long game. When I talk about doing the right thing, that means, even on how we sell, relationship based selling takes time. And many of these companies I work for, they just want the quarter to quarter results. And I see trade offs that are made that I think are the wrong thing to do in many cases for our clients and for our employees. And so that's something that is a consistent challenge for me. So I made the decision a while ago to leave my last employer, and I am in transition and looking for that next C-suite role. And a big part of my, you know, thinking around where I want to land is in a smaller organization where I have the ability to drive and affect more of that change. And I'm not as bound to some of the commitments we've made, to our shareholders in a public setting like that. That truly frustrates me. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I understand the needs to do that at time, but what I'm seeing is a consistent need to do that quarter after quarter after quarter that makes it more and more challenging to get back on the path towards this longer term relationship, that we've built with our clients or need.
Yeah, you touched on a point which actually I was keeping to later, but because you brought it now, so that's great and good timing. You mentioned relationship selling, and you mentioned the usually I live that as well, myself, and I've seen like other friends, colleagues living that, and I can understand. By the end of the day, it's not a charity. But do you think that someone should step out and, I don't know, somehow educate investors, shareholders, in, as we call it, layman, like sentence. I mean, the way of explaining in a very simple way, what means relationship selling and why it needs time sometimes.
Oh, I do think, Mehmet, there needs to be some education around that. What I see is this, um, I think there's a little bit of for many companies, build it and they will come. Well, and that might be the case. And I got the latest Apple iPhone when it came out, right? Like there's a little bit of of that when it comes out. But the reality is, and again, I'm mostly in the B2B professional services space, and I have to consistently, remind people that people do business with people they like and they trust, and therefore they want to do business with. So that means everything from around the focus on our own individual brands, and people are buying from people, but also to and I have a lot of this conversation in the tech space, and that's many times in the companies that I work for, people have grown up through technology and are going out to have a business led conversation. Not all of them have been educated in how to do that. So I usually say I go back to that banking financial services client. We're trying to understand, like, what's the strategy for the bank. So when you speak to a top executive that owns the P&L, and that, by the way, they
Mhm.
give that P&L to technology. That's the and so what's the what's the business strategy, the ability to have that conversation. And many times for me, that's also understanding. I'll ask the leaders themselves, like, how is success measured? And for you personally in that organization, again, building trust and then coming away and developing solutions that tie directly back to not only the strategy or the problem they're trying to solve, but connecting it deeply to their own individual success. But that does take time. So when I worked at this one company, and where this distressed um, client portfolio, I told them 18 to 24 months, because we need to rebuild relationships, trust, credibility, find new people to build relationships with, because some of the old ones were not no longer, fans of ours. And I said, it's going to take 18 to 24 months. One quarter in, where's the growth? Where's it coming? I'm like, guys, what part of this did you not understand when I said it's going to take time to rebuild these relationships? So it's a constant education, re-education for many of the leaders.
Um, Again, just I'm not asking this question to blame or to, point to anyone out there, but what do you think about, people who tries, although they say, yeah, we believe that, yes, it's a relationship, you have to build the trust, you have to do this, but at the same time, what they do in the background is that they try to, I'm not sure if this is a verb, but like robotize or make it like a solid, rigid way. Like, yeah, if you do A, B should happen for sure. And if B is not happening, this is because you're not doing A. Though, we didn't see the result that we were expecting, at the end of this quarter, whatever. Now, why do you think like such thing? I mean, of course, like should be processes. There should be, some playbooks to do things. Like we know this in tech, so you're more experienced than me, actually, Victoria, in this. But again, the human touch. How much is the human touch factor? Because yeah, it is science and art. I agree with this, but I believe is that the human factor in this is have like more. I would say. Like result on all this. It have like more major factor in getting the results. What do you think of that?
I agree. And there's a book that was put out a number of years ago, the Challenger Customer, and it's a follow on the book called the Challenger Sale. And the
Hmm.
Challenger Sale was about the individuals and the buying types and their behavior and how to sell to these different types of buyers. But the Challenger Customer was looking at the more and again in a B2B environment. And at the time, and so I can't remember how many years ago it was published. I think the numbers increased, but at that point they said there's 5.3 or 5.4 buyers for every purchase now that's now being made.
Mm-hmm.
And and understand again what success is measured and how each will come to the table. So for procurement or finance, it is gonna, what's the lowest cost? For the person who owns the customers will want to understand what is the experience for my customers, what's the satisfaction, they, are there, defects. I need to understand, those kinds of things too. Maybe if it's an employee related sale or transaction, what's the employee experience going to look like? So they're all looking for different things, but you're not going to uncover that and get those 5.4 buyers. Again, I think it's probably 7 or 8 now to be in, particularly for large enterprise, to get them on board if you haven't built a relationship with them and you do not understand what is important to them and the constituents that they're serving. And so that's a relationship that needs to take place to uncover and have those conversations. And I think that's what gets missed. And so when we think about technology, it's like we go straight to the CTO, the CIO, the CDO to have these conversations, but they're not the single decision maker here. And in many cases, they don't own the budget. And so we
Right.
have to be having it. And this is where, to your point, like it's like, I think, there's all these sales operations and processes. They're like, well, we had meeting one and we did this and then we presented and we responded to the RFP and we presented pricing. And so why isn't this not working? We should be at 30 to 40% like potential. I'm like, whoa, 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 like let's take a step back here.
Yeah, like I believe like I hope I have some friends that listen to the podcast and they are actually in sales roles, and I think they would be so happy listening to this conversation now. Like, we are now between you and me, like we are speaking their language that sometimes they cannot say it in front of even their colleagues. So, and speaking of that, and I know you talk also, Victoria, about the change of the workforce
Mm.
of the future. And you mentioned like yourself, your own transition. Honestly speaking, I did the same at the beginning of this year, right? So, because I believe we are on the verge of something to change. Like, I don't know what it is, and this is why I speak with experts and leaders like yourself, Victoria, to shed some light about, how the workforce will be in the future. What do you think?
So it's funny. I am a professional public speaker as well. I didn't, mention that on my bio. And one of the topics I spend the most time on is what I used to call the keynote, the future of work. Now it's the future is here. It's
Hmm.
here and now. And so it's a multitude of facets when we talk around how work is changing. Technology, 100% at the forefront. It's changing how we work. Absolutely. What gets left behind as more and more technology and automation comes into play. And the skills are changing so rapidly. The shelf life of skills on average is now less than 2 years. And so understanding the skills that are required for today and how do you connect that to this strategy in the future and where things are going? So, how do we need to take control of our own careers? And also, as leaders in business, how do we need to think about the skills required for future? Are we building it? So, are we educating teams as the skills are required, both functional hard skills of whether that's technology or finance or you name it, but also the human skills. What's evolving and changing? Can I build the talent? Do I go buy the talent? Do I borrow it? Is it automated? All these things. So that's changed the way we need to look at our workforce and the skills that are required. The other thing is obviously, and I think most people have gone to where the work gets done. I think hybrid is here to stay. There's lots of remote first companies, but there's still such benefit to having people together in person to innovate, to problem solve. And so I'm a big fan of the hybrid work.
Hmm.
But then also what's changed dramatically is um, what employees want to be doing work that they believe is purposeful and impactful. And so I think that the role of leaders is to help, particularly for um, entry level, newer or mid level employees to understand how the work they're doing contributes to the company as a whole or to their customers, the community, the world at large, depending what it is. So, wanting to be connected to purpose, things that we value, and the type of leaders that we're working for. So I saw an article yesterday. I said we talk about not naming names, but I didn't write it and I've never worked for them. But it was an article written about PwC, the consulting tech and
Hmm.
finance giant as well, but around some of the ethics and the how clear it was no one was going to challenge the CEO, and so they've agreed to implement all 23 of the findings and recommendations that that I think is what we're gonna see more and more, of the need not necessarily that there needs to be investigations underway, but rather more and more companies moving towards that kind of leadership because I think I'll speak for me. I mean, I want to be one of those leaders, that people would follow into the proverbial fire, but because they believe that, or one, they trust me, and recognize that I'm going to have their back. I'm concerned about who they are as humans, and so that's a big shift for many of the certainly the legacy older school leaders, maybe a little less so from newer ones coming up.
Yeah. So do you expect to see some resistance from these old players?
Yes, because I've had many of them, and so I've worked for there's, I recall working for, an organization whom, uh, they were very comfortable. They had some for example, there was a senior sales leader who was a top performer in terms of bringing in sales into the organization.
Hmm.
However, he was absolutely toxic in the way that he, worked and spoke to and engaged with employees. It was horrific. I mean, name calling, swearing at people, canceling meetings last minute, expecting that they would just drop everything to be available to accommodate him consistently. There were multiple HR investigations underway because there were so many complaints. And I remember having my team members who needed to engage with him come to me and talking to our leaders about it who were not prepared to really address the situation because he was a strong sales performer. So they resisted, they did nothing about it, and so actually, I'm a big believer in control the things you can control, and so in this case, I remember saying to my leader who wasn't prepared to deal with him, then I said, "Let's be clear, none of my team members will support and engage on any of his sales deals going forward because I'm not gonna put my team in a position to be berated and put down and all these sorts of things," and we're talking about, like, within the last 5 years, that this was happening, and I continue to see it, but more and more resistance is coming to that. So I think organizations who are resisting and aren't prepared to address that are going to see significant backlash. Now we saw this, quiet quitting, the Great Resignation. I don't love the
Yes.
phrases of those; are good. They're good for headlines. But the reality is, like that's what's been encountered. Pendulum swung a little bit because right now the market's not incredible, so people are tolerating more than they were even a year or two ago. But it's going to come back.
Yeah, I'm not sure in which publication I've seen this article. Like when they ask people, especially if they are working with big corporates, so they prefer to do one of two things, and one of it, like yeah, like you mentioned, I mentioned, like they go prefer to work for smaller companies because they can shine more. They can their work can be seen. You know, obviously because it's smaller team. And the other one is people who want to actually be by their own, like they want to be in an entrepreneurial journeys. And like controversially also, I had multiple guests that they said what tech companies, because we talk about tech, so what tech companies now, they're playing the stick and carrot game. So giving more perks, like on the salaries, in a way that someone would have to think a million times before thinking of quitting, which is interesting, by the way. And but I believe at the end, people, and this is my own thought about this, if you put too much pressure on people, after some time people will say, you know what, like I'm quitting. Now it's not a quiet quitting, it's an actual quitting. It's actually like shouting that I'm quitting, because at the end of the day, and we also discussed this on the show, I believe, mental health, you know, well-being is something way more important than of course, like everyone wishes to have a nice check every month and, like a stable, but at the end of the day, if you're not feeling comfortable in the workplace, it will not work. So, um like shifting gears a little bit here, like, because you also you go and on public speaking, and you go on different events, and I know you do a lot of interviews as well. So, in the tech scene right now, of course, I know the first the first answer, but what are the current trends and expectations you're hearing and seeing?
Oh, um, well, who hasn't been talking about generative AI and how that's going to change and evolve the way in which we're working? I mean, so that's almost at the forefront of every conversation when it comes to tech, and business and operational leaders figuring out how are we going to leverage this, and what are the ethics behind it, the guardrails, and so it's um, very that's at the forefront, but the other piece is around sort of the ethical use of a lot of the technologies, whether that was, and while I was at IBM, that was around, facial recognition, for example, was, one of those, although they've come under fire because they just won a massive contract, government contract related to going back to doing some of, that work. And then also still foundationally data and analytics, in terms of how are we leveraging the data in the business. Many companies trying to figure out how to monetize that, but the
Hmm.
common, um, um, for large, again, I spend a lot of time with large enterprise. So, is there a data lake? What are the consistency around it? The orchestration layer, again, in many of these like very, um, fractional or set businesses that, are not operating, and maybe they come together through, acquisition. So again, how to leverage that and look at that, very differently, would be another. And then just the I will say the war on talent, for technical talent, as well, just continues to be at the forefront for all of them. There's so much demand for it. And how do you upskill? Going back to that sort of the skill conversation I said earlier, like how are you upskilling to get ahead of the need and then retaining, that talent?
Yeah, I agree with you. Like again, like these things I ask just, to highlight that, guys, this is happening. These are where things are moving on. The data is something very important. And this is I think maybe I was still doing solo episodes, like I didn't have guests at that time. And one of the you know topics that I brought and I talked about is that every CTO, every CIO should be sitting with the leadership team and thinking how we can leverage the data to generate money, to generate income. So this is, I think, it's top of mind of every executive now.
Yeah.
Again, it's good you mentioned it, Victoria. Now, uh, something I love, I'm passionate about. You did it very well, and I'm trying to do it myself, which is personal branding,
Mm.
right? And I believe, and I want to hear your opinion and your experience about that. People ask me why you're doing this, like why you're trying to build a personal brand, and my answer is, for me, it's not because I want to show off. It's because you know I want to help people by recognizing me as expert in X, Y, or Z, right? So I want to hear your opinion on this, Victoria, and how did you manage to get this? Because I know you have done great job, with your personal branding. You're a very well known face. So I want to hear your first thought about why it's important and how did you manage to get the success you have today.
Uh, I I don't think I had the vernacular 20 years ago in saying personal branding, but that's what I was starting to do when I made that shift from a B2C environment of financial services into B2B and leading sales and client management teams and trying to understand how it worked. Receive an RFP, like how do you get invited to it? But then when you receive, how do you differentiate yourself? So going back to the relationship based selling, that people do business with people they like, trust, and want to do business with. I recognized obviously there's an organizational brand I needed to work on in in that first C-suite role for me, but then the brand of who I am and who my team are to differentiate ourselves against others. So again, I wasn't calling it personal branding 20 years ago. That probably came in the last 10 or so years when, the phraseology came about. Uh,
Right.
but again, it's around well, I should say for me, personal brand is four pieces to that broadly. And where I see many people focus on, and you said you want to be known as a subject matter expertise in X, Y, and Z. And so that's the foundational element of that. But then the other pieces are when there's people who are exceptionally talented and knowledgeable in the space that you are, how do you differentiate yourself, whether that's to get hired, to sell to, or hire people? And so then the other pieces are also about what's your story? Who are you as a human? What are your passions, your interests, the things that you value? Because that's what initially sparks connection with people, those shared, common passions, interests, values. And then the next piece, however, is what makes you different? What is your unique value proposition? So again, I've been leading large consulting tech and services teams. And so why are they choosing someone on my team or me personally if I'm standing in front of them versus my competitors? And so for me, for example, that's things like I talked about my radical candor, but it builds trust instantly. I remember telling a client last year, I said, Patrick, I do not think that you hired Accenture or myself and my team to tell you what you want to hear. And so it was kind of like, I think the people on the call are like, what? And then I, went forward to like challenge him on some things. And that's a differentiator for me. Also, the fact that I'm maniacally focused on being the right kind of, I call it human centered or heart centered leader that's empathetic. I still drive strong business results and I'm focused on DE&I. Those are all differentiators for me. And the last piece, and this might be a little bit of why you also do, the podcast and build your brand is what's your legacy? What do you want to be known for? And so for me, my proverbial tombstone is not going to have written on it the sales and revenue and profitability that I drove for the companies that I work for. It's going to be around the impact I had on other people. So I do public speaking and I, share my experiences because there's so many things that in my late 40s, I wish my 20-year-old self would have known. Now, would I have listened to her? I don't know. But can I share my experiences? Can I make the workplace, my community, and the world, a better place? Did I raise two good humans? Those are all the things for me I think about. And developing the narrative around those sort of four elements is what gets you known. And so this is actually one of the first times in my own life where I've ever actually been intentional around seeking a new role because I'm usually found. And that's because of the strength of my brand. When I was at IBM, LinkedIn recognized me as their number one social seller worldwide. Their phrase, for brands. So actually IBM had me develop the education for their executives as well. So it's critically important. And what I'd tell your listeners now that they need to build their brand, much like building their network when they don't need it. So it's there for them when they do. So my older son is 23 years old. And I'm like, buddy, he was come out of college, computer engineering. And I'm like, dude, you need to get on LinkedIn. And he's like, oh, that's for old people, mom. I'm like, I'm like, but that's where your employers, prospective employers are and start to build the brand. So they start to know who you are and not just who your mom is.
Yeah. By the way, just funny enough, you mentioned this. Some people asked me, like, do you try to do it in other platforms? I said, look, like, if you want to do it right, you should succeed in the one platform, and then you might think to expand this. And this is how you do even it's ABC business. So you start with, let's say, one shop, and then you start to open branches in other cities and states, like if you are in the US and other places, other countries. So you need to have a focus first in one place. Because honestly, when I tried to be everywhere, it didn't work with me, right? So I get distracted because some people, they love Twitter, which is now X. Some people, I don't know, love something else. So for me, because it's like first more professional, it's like more B2B, this is what I love to do also as well. So I knew that LinkedIn is my place. But what I took away from what you said, it's something I hope the audience will repeat that part where you were mentioning. So first, of course, to be known as a thought leader or, the subject matter expert. I love the other two you mentioned. So authenticity, being yourself. So people knows, for example, Victoria as Victoria, like it's not only, the executive at X, so for you as a person, they trust. The other one is relationship, which is, I can share my experience. Like, I'm new to this, by the way. LinkedIn, I've been long time, and people, they were pushing me to write more and said, you know what, I don't have time to write. Maybe it's better to record. That's why I did the podcast. And I can tell you guys, in 9 months, my network grew by 200%. Right. And, I find myself now talking, for example, to people like Victoria, like I'm talking to you, Victoria, you are an executive. I'm talking to CEOs in Silicon Valley. I'm talking, to angel investors, I don't know where, so and these things, it's not for the sake of just, making noise. It's because maybe, and by the way, it happened, and I shared about a couple of days back, one of my audience reached out to me and he said, I connected with the guest and now we are working on a startup idea. And I said, "Poof, wow, like, this is the thing that I want to hear." And people ask me, okay, do you have a large, audience? Yeah, on LinkedIn, I'm fine. I'm doing well. I would say still baby steps. On the podcast, I promised myself, if every day I get one, because I do daily, if I get one download or listen per day, that's for me more than enough. Like, it's enough for me that one person, he or she, they are listening to me and they will get something out. And it went, yeah, it was very slow at the beginning. It was very hard for me. I'm new to the whole thing, but I'm enjoying too much. And when I see people like yourself, Victoria, passionate about this, I get excited and I start to speak also myself. So thank you for sharing this. Now, as we come close to the end, we talked a lot about leadership, and I told you the majority of my audience are either in the tech space or to be founders or entrepreneurs, or maybe they already founded their companies. I know that you have a lot to tell them, about leadership and how to be a better leader, how to be a more humble leader, and why it's not about the title. I want to hear your opinion and what you would advise fellow entrepreneurs.
Yeah, one of the last things you said, Mehmet, is important to me around it's not about the title. And I talk about this a lot. Like we are all leaders. Our voice is our power. And so whether you're a new hire into a company, you're fresh out of school, or you're at the top of that hierarchy, we're all leaders. So I want people to understand that and recognize that it isn't purely by title or how many people that you're leading, et cetera. So that's number one. Two is, and I come to this because I made some mistakes early in my leadership journey. My first actually leadership role was at 14. I was like the assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at when I was in high school. But um, that executive role at age 24, I was the youngest executive by at least 20 years, and I was the only woman. And because of my sort of origin story and, trauma and adversity in my youth, I also was always trying to prove more and better. And I showed up as a leader who was very clear on how success was measured. I've always been, clear on the outcomes for which I am measured and incented against, and that we need to and we need to be driving. But I came to it and I got a nickname. I think I found out when I was like 28 years old that my nickname was the Iron Maiden. And it's because I felt like I wanted to ensure that everyone knew that I belonged there. I don't love the phrase imposter syndrome, but just for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
phrase, I probably felt a little bit like the imposter because I was so young, and although I had a number of great successes and experience under my belt, and I was the only woman, so I feel like I showed up. I was all business all the time. I'm not going to tell you openly that I don't know something. Now I'm like, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm going to go and find someone who does, or I'll educate myself and come back to you on it. But I wouldn't have done that then. But actually, more importantly, when I think of what makes a great leader now, I wasn't authentic and vulnerable and open and transparent. Like I said, all business all the time. So Iron Maiden came. I delivered exceptional business results. I made some really tough business decisions. around performance, around, structure, and it impacted other people's livelihoods, unfortunately. But I never showed them how hard that was for me. I came into work one Monday. It was probably like within a matter of months after hearing the Iron Maiden and phrase, and someone said to me, we were talking about our weekend, and I said I was crying. I had gone to a movie theater and I was crying. The movie was just like so emotional. And she kind of looked at me and she's like, Vic, I thought you'd laugh at people who cried at movies. And I will tell you that crushed me because that is not who I am. And so for me, being a good leader, I've learned is about being really authentic. And authentic means one, I'm going to share with you my my story. I'm going to share with you some fears and insecurity. I'm going to tell you I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to be vulnerable with you because again, that builds trust. People now believe that I have their back. And so I think that's something when we're talking about, the future of work or what's evolving and changing, this kind of era of really responsible leadership, doing the right thing and being much more sort of human centered and recognizing we're whole people that show up every day versus being a cog in a wheel. That's more important. And that's where I spent a lot of time trying to get my own leadership team focused and acting, talking, behaving, in the kinds of ways that, we want to be, and for me, the kind of leader that I would wanna work for.
Great insights and great advice. So, for the founders, be yourselves, you know, don't try to behave like someone else. Be, if I can summarize it this way, Victoria, like be yourself. Everyone has at some stage in his or her life some adversity, I would say. Um, you know, so we don't know each other's stories. So this is something very important that you touched on, and it's very actually emotional. What you mentioned when, like someone thought that if you see someone crying for watching a movie, crying during watching a movie, so because unfortunately sometimes, and this is why I started to do at the end of each episode, I'm bringing this human factor because okay, yeah, we talk about startups, growth, sales, marketing, AI, all these, but we should not forget, I say, the human element, because we and back to your the topic that you discussed also as well about uh, relationship in sales, and because humans deals with humans, you buy from someone who's a human also as well. So Victoria, like I think you enriched us today with a lot of experience, a ton of experience. My final thing that I do with all my guests, and by the way, it's not a tricky question, is there anything that you wished should ask you?
Ah, it'd be a longer topic. The one that you didn't ask me that's super important to me, and I think we all need to be really concerned about is diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in tech, because we still have a very, very long way to go. So I use a phrase, strategic intentionality, that I think we need to be to do more, different, and better, and be much more representative in the workforce as a whole, but also very, very specifically in tech to see it much more representative of the communities in the world that we live in.
Agreed with you, and thank you for sharing this. Just a fun fact: when I asked this question at the end, so some of them, I guess, they think that I'm trying to trick them, and they said, "Okay, do you want me to say something personal?" I said, "No, no, no. It doesn't have to be something personal, but maybe because when I prepare, sometimes, by the way, this is also I like to be transparent. So people ask me, "Do you prepare the questions?" So sometimes, yes, of course, I have like a couple of points, but majority of the question they come out during the discussion. So this is why also I ask at the end this question, because maybe I missed something, or maybe a topic that we should have brought we didn't. So this is why I keep the space open for my guest. Victoria, thank you very much for being the my guest here today. A lot, as I said, a lot of experience you shared with us. Where people can find more about you?
So I have a single landing page, which is victoria-pelletier.com, that will allow people to choose where they want to connect with me. Like you, Mehmet, I'm very much on LinkedIn, so they can link out to connect with me there through X, through Instagram, Facebook, whatever. But the landing page of victoria-pelletier.com will get them there.
Great. So I'll make sure that this will be in the show notes. So guys, like feel free to reach out to Victoria. And this is the way I end my episodes. I love to hear feedback. It's not only about, talking all these topics. I want to hear also, what do you think? Is there anything you're not liking? I'm appreciating all the positive feedbacks, all the encouragement, but I like constructive feedback because always I try to see. I'm sure that I'm not perfect in this. I need still to fix a lot of things actually. Maybe by having a studio, proper studio. This is my home. So, so anyway, keep them coming. And also, if you're interested to be on the show, don't hesitate. This is a space. If you have some experience you want to share with us, if you are working on a great idea, building a startup, you want to share it, you're not getting a PR space, reach out to me. No issues. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. My guests, majority of them, they are in the US. I'm based in Dubai. Some guests in New Zealand. Some guests in all around the world. Time zones, I'm lucky to be kind of in the middle, so I can afford all the time zones. So don't hesitate, reach out. And thank you for tuning in. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.